Hey, what is up guys, MurgaMan4 here, and today I'm going to be giving you my thoughts and opinions on Demons of the Punjab, the very first episode of Series 11 to not be written or co-written by Chris Chibnall. So, how does this episode stand up in comparison to our showrunners episodes? First things first, I want to say that I really love the setting of this episode and the overall style of it. It's not too often, even when we go into the past, that we visit places outside of the UK or more recently, mainly during the Moffat era, we also had a decent amount of American stories. But it's not too often that we visit places outside of those countries when we're in the past on Earth. So it's really great to have an episode that's set in a more exotic location and actually have that location and something specific to that area pretty much making the episode what it is. We've had visits to other countries as background settings. Ones that comes to mind more recently are Let's Kill Hitler, set mostly in Germany, but really has nothing to do with the plot. It doesn't have to be set in Germany. Or Cold War, that was, the Russians are a lot more relevant to that one, but the story isn't about the Russians. That is again a setting. It's about the ice warrior on the submarine. And that wasn't actually set in Russia, it just was on a Russian sub in the Arctic. But here we have Demons of the Punjab set in India, right on the border between India and Pakistan during the partition of India. And this just creates this really awesome atmosphere that we don't often feel in Doctor Who. I love that Chibnall has been bringing back this kind of educational aspect to the show that we haven't had for quite a while. I know some people have been having issues with it, but I actually really enjoy that. I like to be able to learn stuff from Doctor Who as well as be entertained. And I didn't know anything about the partition of India before seeing this episode. I still don't know a ton about it. I would say this episode isn't quite as educational as something like Rosa, but I still came away from the episode knowing a decent amount more about the partition than I did before. And I'm really glad about that. I think that's great that the show is able to do that and return to its original roots, because, I mean, there are some great stories from 60s Doctor Who that were educational historicals. Two ones from the first season that really stand out to me are Marco Polo, which was set in China, and the Aztecs, which was set in Mexico. And those are great stories, and I love being able to return to those roots. And again, both of those stories are ones that were set outside of the UK or America. And so it's great to be able to see that. I also want to mention that this is really brought to life by the stunning location work. I'm not sure where they filmed it, but it looks gorgeous. And this episode probably has my favorite score so far from Segun Akinola. It's just beautiful. I love when music can enhance and express the culture of where an episode of a TV show or a film is set. And honestly, a lot of the time, I feel like Doctor Who music doesn't necessarily do that. Not usually the incidental music anyways. In Rosa there were a couple of songs that were chosen to be in the episode, but the incidental music I couldn't specifically point out to be from the southern US. But in this episode, it's got some fantastic Indian-style music. And one of my favorite pieces absolutely is at the end of the episode, and I'm going to talk about that later. But it really just sets the tone of the episode and pulls you right in. But anyway, the basic premise of the episode is that Yaz is visiting her Nan when she was younger and when she was living in India. And we've had a similar kind of basic concept before. In the very first series of the new series, we had Rose wanting to go and see her dad. The big difference being, though, that Yaz's Nan is still alive in the future, and Rose specifically wanted to go back to see her dad when he died. But here, Yaz is just wanting to see her grandma when she was younger. And we end up visiting an area of her Nan's life that Yaz didn't know anything about. And this does lead to a similar sort of conflict of not messing with history, but again, Big difference is Father's Day, they actually do mess with history and it has big consequences. Here, they're mostly observers. And I know this is another thing that's an issue for a decent amount of people, but I don't have so much of a problem with the Doctor and her companions as observers every once in a while. But yeah, when I think about it, they really didn't impact the plot too much, but I thought it was really interesting to just experience everything that happens in this episode with the Doctor and her companions and be able to see that in the way that, they were. Because they get caught up in events. They don't really change any events or impact much, but they get caught up in it, and it's really great to see. I do want to mention, though, that it does feel a little bit weird, considering we're going back to see Yaz's Nan, that neither Graham nor Ryan bring up Grace's death at all. It's been mentioned, I think, in pretty much every episode so far, and this is probably the first episode her death hasn't been mentioned, which is kind of weird, because you'd think, going back in time to see Yaz's grandma would spur Ryan to want to, see his grandma before, she obviously passed away. But that isn't brought up at all, which is a little bit odd, but oh well. It's also nice to see, based off of some of their banter near the beginning of the episode, that they've been traveling at least a little while together now. We're starting to get gaps between the adventures. Same thing happened last week too, and so they're starting to grow closer together. It does kind of suck a little bit. We haven't got to see a lot of that development because they didn't officially become companions until the end of episode 4, and already by episode 6 they feel like they've had a bunch of adventures together. But honestly, I don't think that's too bad, and I guess it makes sense because we are over the halfway point of the series now. And it is fun to have references to off-screen adventures. Now, I want to discuss the main threats of this episode. So we're introduced to these things that are referred to as demons, hence the title Demons of the Punjab, although there is a different kind of demon that's presented in the episode. They're introduced as these very menacing creatures with some really scary music and very threatening appearances. And it's later revealed that they're not really bad guys at all. Now, this is something that goes throughout the whole episode, but I'm going to talk about the whole thing of it here. I really feel that this episode would have been significantly better without them, because they didn't really leave any impact on me at all. I thought, first time watching through it, I thought it was interesting, waiting to find out what they are, what they're here for. And it is an interesting and unexpected twist that they're actually not the bad guys. They were bad guys. They were assassins like the 13th Doctor thought they were, but they changed their ways. Although I admit, even on first watch, the reason that they changed their ways, I didn't really buy it, because they were out, I guess, assassinating, and then they came back to their home planet and it was all gone, and then they're like, oh, our whole planet's dead. Let's stop killing people and instead start mourning people. I don't know, that just didn't feel right to me. It just, I don't know, I don't buy that. But anyway, all right, fine. It's an interesting twist. I think it's a well executed twist. Well, and they disappear after we find out about that. They disappear from the plot for a good chunk of the episode, and it's like they're almost entirely forgotten about. And then they briefly appear near the end of the episode again, and that's it. But these guys don't really have an effect on the plot whatsoever. Unlike the Doctor and her companions, because them experiencing things with these characters, it still adds some substance to the episode, and it has something to do with what's going on, because they are actively involved in the plot, even if they're not really affecting or changing it. But these demons are literally just observers. Like, the only thing, they never really impact anything. They don't even get involved with anything. They're just watching. Their only reason for existence is for there to be a monster in the episode. And I don't think that should be a requirement. You shouldn't have to have a monster. And I don't know, that's just really disappointing to me, because I am an advocate for having some pure historicals, and it's disappointing for me when we get these episodes that are screaming to be pure historicals, but then they shove a monster in there. Because every time, on my second watch through, once I knew what their purpose was and what their function was, the second they appear, it sucked me right out of the story, because it has nothing to do with it. It's a completely separate story, and it just has no impact at all. So, I don't know, I really didn't like it, and knowing that they end up not impacting anything, it just didn't interest me at all what was going on a second watch, because I was actually really engaged with the main character stuff that was happening, and the conflict that was going on because of the partition. But then these guys appear, and it just takes me right out of it, and I'm like, well, why do you have to go and do that? Because I was so invested with what was going on, and then you just take that right away from me. But yeah, I was not a fan of them. They were just bland and just didn't fit the story. It just took everything interesting away as soon as they came on screen for me. So I just did not like them whatsoever. And it really sucks too, because without them, I feel like this episode would definitely be the strongest of the season, for sure, but I guess it's not to be, because the problem is a decent chunk in the middle is dedicated to them. So it just eats up time that could have been spent better utilized. Oh, and before I forget, there was another thing about the demons where it doesn't quite add up with their ultimate goal, because like I said, they just want to mourn the dead and be observers. But there's two things that they say that seem to contradict that. One, when the doctor says she's going to make sure that she prevents whatever they're going to do, they say, you cannot prevent this. Which is weird, because she's specifically referring to what their plans are, and their plans aren't even hostile or anything. Their plans are just to observe, so why would they say, you can't stop this? Because, I don't know, they're just watching what's happening, so that doesn't really make sense. The other thing is, at one point they say, we will stand over your corpses, which kind of makes sense, I guess, in the context of what they do, because, you know, again, they watch over and mourn over the dead, but that's a very threatening kind of thing to say, and they don't know that they're going to stand over all their corpses, because as far as we know, they don't stand over everyone's corpses, because they just say they stand over the ones who are like alone and unacknowledged when they die. And I don't know, you wouldn't say that in that situation. So I don't know, those things just didn't add up to me. But not talking about those sci-fi monsters, but our characters, because this is, again, a more character-based story, I really like most of the characters in this episode, especially the brotherly conflict between Manesh and Prem. I really liked Prem. He was great, and the actor was really good too. And Manesh, he ends up being the real villain of the episode, because Prem is a Hindu, and he's going to marry Umbreen, Yaz's Nan, and she is a Muslim. And India is being split, Pakistan for the Muslims, India for the Hindus, and so he just can't agree with what the brother is doing, and he's fighting against it. And that conflict throughout the episode I found really engaging and interesting, because I just find it so crazy how these kinds of things can tear relationships apart, and I find that just so interesting, and these actors did a really good job with the role. Umbreen, on the other hand, her actress I didn't like as much. Her performance I didn't particularly like. I really liked the older Umbreen, like when we're in present day, she was great, but the younger Umbreen, she was fine, I guess. What was really interesting though, that I forgot to mention is I did mention that this is an area of Umbreen's life that Yaz didn't know about, but it's crazy. But it's really neat, because Prem is not the man that becomes Yaz's grandfather, and she knows this. And so there's this interesting mystery of, well, what happens to get Umbreen to marry Yaz's grandfather, who is her real grandfather. I mean, it's kind of obvious, you know something is going to happen to Prem by the end of the episode. You know he's not going to get out of it, and that's why. But it's still neat, nonetheless, to see Yaz's reaction to it, and the Doctor and companions trying to figure it out. Speaking of the companions, yes, it's this time of the week again, time to talk about the companions. This is definitely Yaz's episode. This is the first episode where she's kind of the focus. Graham and Ryan are a little bit in the background, but still I find her the least interesting, which is really a shame. At this point, I don't know how much more they can do with the character to make her grow on me, because it's not that I dislike her. She's a good enough character. I just don't find her really compelling or interesting, which is a shame. Graham is still my favorite. There were a couple of standout scenes with him. I really liked when he was giving advice to Yaz, saying that, because she was surprised that her grandma wouldn't tell her about this part of her life, and Graham's just trying to give her some life advice and saying, that woman there isn't your gran yet. She's, going to grow and change and become your nan, after time. And it's just great that he fills that kind of role. I'm so happy we have an older companion. And I'm also continually interested in his relationship with Ryan. They've definitely been growing on each other and becoming friendlier with each other, which is awesome to see. Now, that's the thing with Ryan, too, is I also think that he's relatively uninteresting on his own. The thing that keeps me interested in Ryan is his relationship with Graham, which continues to be really strong. But I think that's also mainly because of Bradley Walsh's presence and how wonderfully his character is portrayed. So yeah, it's Yaz's episode, but Graham still walks away being the most memorable companion. But anyway, it's time for the wedding between Prem and Umbreen, and this is pretty much the final straw for Manesh, because he can't take it, he can't accept that his brother, a Hindu, would marry a Muslim woman. And it's this point where the stakes are starting to rise, because the partition is pretty much about to happen. They're marking off the borders and everything, and Manesh, after the wedding, he calls, I'm not sure exactly who it is that he calls, but people with some sort of authority to, do something about it, to remove people from the land who don't belong, I think he says. And we have the doctor going and confronting him about it, but he's not changing how he's feeling. And then Prem decides that he's got to confront his brother about it. He makes sure that Umbreen and her mom go away so that they can be safe. The doctor wants to confront Manesh with Prem. She knows that he's going to die because I can't remember what they're called, the demons, Thajarians? I think their name is Thajarians, because they mourn those who die, and they can see the timelines or whatever and see who's going to die. So they told the doctor that he is going to die. And so she offers to go with him, but he says he's going to do it alone. And there's a fantastic scene where you have Prem and Manesh just one-on-one. And you have whoever they are, authority people, behind him on horseback with their guns. And there's this final confrontation. It's very emotional and really powerful just to see family torn apart like that. And I do like that we don't always get a happy ending. That just makes things feel more real, and it makes the emotion impact harder and stronger. And so I'm really happy to see that we aren't always going to get, everything's all fixed in the end, everything's okay, hey, the brothers made up with each other, love wins in the end. No, sometimes it doesn't. And I find that to be a very emotional scene. And of course, Prem ends up getting shot because he stands up for what he believes in, and he says, everyone's welcome here, there's no one here who doesn't belong. And he's gone. He died standing up for what he believed in. And then those demons show up again, just briefly saying, oh, we'll watch over him. But we're back in present day, and we get one final really lovely scene with Yaz and her nan. And it's a beautiful, beautiful ending, with them basically just saying they love each other. And I'll admit, that ending actually got me really emotional, especially with the end credits. I mentioned with Rosa that I'm generally not a fan of them changing up the end credit music. And I still stand by that statement for Rosa. And upon initially watching this, I felt the same way about this. Because it's an Indian rendition of the Doctor Who theme. I always thought it was better than with Rosa, because at least it is a rendition of the Doctor Who theme. whereas Rose was just a random pop song, which I still don't like. But if it's a rendition of the Doctor Who theme, okay, I can understand that. But upon rewatching it, it is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and honestly, it's been stuck in my head since I first watched the episode 3 days ago. It was just really impactful and just, wow, what a beautiful rendition of the theme. And I think that was the right choice. I honestly, genuinely now think that it definitely works better with that version of the theme. It's so good. It's a good choice on that second Echinol. Beautiful composition there. And what a beautiful way to end the episode. But, yeah, I guess that's my thoughts and opinions on Demons of the Punjab. It was definitely a thoroughly enjoyable episode. All the character stuff I really, really liked. It's just a shame about those stupid aliens, because this episode would have been so much better without them. And they definitely drag it down for me, which sucks. Perhaps if they didn't have as much of a presence, they wouldn't have as much of an impact on my opinion of the episode, but fortunately they do. But as far as episodes written by, not Chris Chibnall, because this is the first one that isn't, I'd say it's pretty decent. It's not my favorite of the series, but it was definitely pretty strong. And I know a lot of people have been complaining about Chibnall's writing. I still think that Chibnall isn't a bad writer. He's just an average writer. And while I'm definitely happy to get some variety, I don't blame, the series mistakes entirely on Chibnall so far, like everyone else seems to be doing. It's like, oh, thank goodness Chibnall didn't write this episode. It's so much better. Now we know Chibnall was the problem all along, but I don't know. I don't quite agree with that. But anyway, yeah, that was Demons of the Punjab, and I think I'm going to give it a 7.5. Those aliens, though. If this was a pure historical, I bet this could have gotten definitely at least an 8, maybe even an 8.5 or even a 9. But I don't know. The character stuff in this episode was so strong. But yeah, that's my thoughts and opinions on Demons of the Punjab. Excited to see what our other guest writers are going to bring throughout the rest of the season. And I guess put your thoughts and opinions on the episode down below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you next week with Kerblam.